Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast. I am your host, Jeff Hyman, and it is great to have you listening to the show. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And my guest today is a CEO of a fascinating business. It's not some software business. We cover plenty of those. We cover healthcare businesses. This, I can promise you, is a topic we've never discussed on this show before. But first, let me tell you briefly about the guest, Adam Litle. Adam is super smart. I'm a little intimidated going into this interview because the guy goes to Yale. If that's not enough, he decides to get an MBA and a JD law degree from University of Michigan, go Blue. And then he becomes an investment banker. You got to do that. The guy goes on to lead a number of important functions of a huge success story, which was Granular. Granular, if you're not familiar, a SaaS company to help farmers. That's where the story starts to get really interesting because now Adam is leading as the CEO, Sound Agriculture, based in San Francisco Bay Area, and they focus on helping crop solutions for farmers. And so we're going to talk about over the next 20 minutes how he's scaling the organization, how he's building the culture, and all that fun stuff. And so with that, welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you, Jeff. And way too kind along the way. I was basically just figuring out what I wanted to do and wanted more school loans to the whole mix. So
I doubt that.
The opportunity to be on.
Well, it's super nice to have you on. So Sound Agriculture, it's a little bit tricky to describe. So I'm going to let you do it. From what's the layman's definition or description of Sound Agriculture, the product that you're making and selling?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with our mission, and then I'll get into what the actual products are. So at Sound, we create on-demand crop solutions that lead to tastier, healthier, and more sustainable food. And so we're really focused on two categories. One is a bunch of biochemistry products that get to a more sustainable way of growing crops. So for example, we have this product called Source that you spray on corn today and testing in soybeans in order to stimulate soil microbes to produce more nitrogen and phosphorus. So automatically you're creating nutrients instead of having to dump on more synthetic fertilizer. So it's a really nice sustainability play that can dramatically impact climate change and how food is grown and use of chemicals.
What kind of percent yield increase does that give me in my crops? Do you know?
So yeah, so you can either use it to increase yield between 5 and 10%, which is a big deal.
That's huge. Yeah.
90 million acres of corn in the U.S. alone.
Yep.
Or you can use it to reduce the amount of fertilizer you're putting on and sort of stabilize yield. And in the future, you're going to see farmers who want to do both, and then you're going to get we're increasingly seeing climate shocks that this sort of product get the plant biology to work harder with what's there instead of extrinsic methods. The other thing we do at Sound is a little different. It's on the biology side. We actually can create custom traits in plants within about 3 months. And so instead of traditional plant breeding where it takes 5 to 7 years to do something new, for example, develop pest resistance or develop different color or different taste profiles or micronutrients, we can do that dramatically faster, like 10x faster without changing the genome. So that's a really new, exciting platform we're working on. And we think the chemistry and the biology work hand in hand to take a new approach to growing plants.
It's fascinating. This is the next frontier, obviously, in food. Every time I fly across the country, back when we were allowed to fly,
Yes.
I was fascinated. I know this sounds silly, but I would look out the window and I was fascinated by how much farmland there is in this country that we just don't think about unless we're in the business. Can you give some quick metrics to the listeners on how many acres or how many farmers or something, just so people understand how the magnitude of this?
Yeah, and that's why road trips are so nice in the country. So it's not just flyover, but it is fun to see.
Right.
It is fun to see the circles and the squares as you're flying over Iowa and all that. So there's about 300 and some million acres of cropland, stuff that we grow food on that we eat. And there's another, I believe, 400 or 500 million acres of pasture and ranching land and other things like that. So it's pretty massive.
And this is not a high margin business.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would say this is not a high margin business. So your product that can increase yield 5, 10, 15% makes a huge difference in profitability for these farms, right?
You got it. There was a mentor who I worked with at Granular, this guy Danny Kleinfelter, and he would have this thing, the 5% rule. And it's the sort of thing where you find 5% here in 5 different places, and all of a sudden you're leader in the space, because otherwise you're looking at a 5% margin to begin with.
It's that tough. It's almost like the grocery business. I guess there's some connection between the two. So let's talk about the people part. So Sound Agriculture, you've had the good fortune to raise venture capital from some of the top folks in the country. You've raised, I think, $40 million. You have a team of 30 people. Tell us where these 30 people are located. I found this fascinating. And how do you lead a team that's structured that way?
Sure. So we've got about a little over half the team in the Bay Area, so right outside San Francisco, in a place called Emeryville. And that's mostly the lab R&D team, and then G&A functions. Then we've got a small office in Research Triangle in North Carolina with some of our commercial folks and field development. And then we've got about a half dozen folks in the middle of the country, in the Corn Belt there, working with growers and retailers. So it's pretty distributed, especially for a small team. And then, of course, now the office barely exists for a lot of us. So I started on April 1st. And I have only been in the office when I interviewed. And so that's really that's probably the most, interesting. I've talked to a few others who've been in the same boat, maybe some listeners have, navigating that, building trust when you're only a face on the screen. That's the toughest part right now.
So maybe let's get right into that, because that's a really unique situation to be in, right? You're the relatively new 4-month CEO of this business that already existed. You joined to scale the company. How do you do that when you haven't met many of your team in person? You're not in an office. You're creating and molding and building and scaling culture out of thin air. So what have you learned in 4 months about how to do that?
Yeah, so I think about that a lot. And I'd say there's a few categories. There's no one single easy answer. One category is a lot of conversations and just taking time and one-on-ones and the blocking and tackling, but also the fun stuff of being a leader, getting to know your team. And there's no replacement for just spending time with folks. And since you can't do it over a drink or dinner or that coffee, Zoom's not bad, right? The screen is pretty good. I don't know what we would do 10 years ago in this situation. 2 is, this makes a big difference of how much you can be a digital first company and engage remotely and think about the little things that make people's lives easier and build trust along the way. And luckily, working at a couple of software companies, I had done that before and had distributed teams. So this is kind of that on steroids, but it's stuff like pausing when you're on meetings to allow folks to weigh in more often, or asking certain folks who are remote, do you have a take on this, versus just blowing through as you might if most people are in the conference room, or having the virtual coffee chats. We just kicked off a fitness challenge for 30 days where we break up into teams of 4 and all got on a mobile app to compare activity and push each other. And those little gimmicks, it's about creating shared experiences, which is even tougher right now. So anything you can do helps there.
In what way have you had to change your personal leadership style the most to adapt to remote leadership with a new team who you didn't previously have these, beer drinking, meal sharing, airplane flying relationships with?
One way is to slow down a bit. I tend to be pretty fast. I've operated a little more as a change agent, and that's also why I came in. And at Sound, we're at such a fun, opportunistic inflection point where we're moving from more of R&D and product into revenue. This is our first year of revenue, and it's going really well. But I tend to want to go quite fast. I think speed is the key to startups succeeding. That's a big advantage over big companies. But in this environment in particular, tap the brakes a little bit and allow people to catch up and enable others. I'd say another one is really looking for ways to get group engagement with others taking the baton and moving forward from the get-go, and just kind of delegating more, pushing out more, as opposed to trying to do more things myself. And that's also a first-time CEO thing, because this is the first time I am in that seat, and I'm loving it and I'm learning. But at the same time, you've got to let go of the reins sometimes.
How has the pandemic and this remote style affected the morale of the troops? What do you sense your team is thinking about, worried about, other than, personal health, of course, which comes first, but beyond that, with regard to the company and the business, things and worries and concerns that you probably didn't hear before?
It's some of the classic stuff you'd expect, where looking at the economy, are folks going to have secure jobs or not? And not necessarily a sound thing, but in general.
Sure.
Price of corn and commodity prices drive a lot of success in agriculture in general, and that's come down along with other commodities.
Yep.
But it's not anywhere near danger levels. It's just a general sense of anxiety. And so I think that the combination of COVID plus Black Lives Matter movement and some identity and true civil rights questions that are top of mind for folks, it's just more important than work right now. So that
you're competing for their mind share, maybe more than you did in the past.
You are, and the ground is moving beneath everybody faster than ever before. So the more I move the ground at sound, which we need to do and people want to do, it feels even more dramatic than otherwise would be.
So that means you take a more measured approach to making changes and trying new things than perhaps in the past.
Well, here's the trade-off, Jeff. Usually, I'm very much a believer in lean startup approach, and which is fundamentally more about experimentation and iteration, because the thesis is you're not going to get to the right decision in a boardroom or a management room, and experiment as much as you can to learn fast. I think that's harder during COVID, because that uncertainty that a lot of people would typically embrace in a startup, people want more stability from work right now and security. And so I do think you have to be more deliberate and less iterative. So I am trying to really focus on where that change occurs. And that's been an adjustment over the last few months.
Let's talk about hiring, recruiting. You led a 150-person sales team previously at your former shop. Hiring sales reps has got to be one of the most difficult types of recruiting for so many reasons. What can you share with listeners about some of the key lessons that you learned about how to do that more effectively, that you're bringing to this new role as CEO of Sound?
Sure. And just by the way, I can comment beyond sales too. It was sales, customer success, and ops. So I don't want to represent that it was only just sales. But
great, even better.
I think in hiring in general, and this is beyond those functions, I'm a big fan of case studies or presentations to get to how someone's mind works. And in particular, sales. When we were interviewing, everyone would have their opinion of someone coming in, and you get a lot of good talkers, especially in sales, who can sell themselves. But then what tended to make or break the hire was how good they were in the pitch. And you let them pitch something that is familiar to them. It doesn't really matter what they're pitching. And you kind of have some fun with it and put them to the paces and see how they can handle objections and what their style is and how they would approach it. Or if it's hiring C-level folks, the whiteboarding exercise in terms of how they think. And I think people overlook, especially at startups, how important that is and broadly applicable it can be. It doesn't have to be a Google regimented 6-step process. It's just get to that sort of thing as fast as possible.
What are you looking for in those sessions that you can't find or ascertain in a traditional interview?
How people pivot with unexpected questions mostly, and how their mind works in a way that it takes them out of what they plan to say and have rehearsed 100 times.
So how they think on their feet, how they handle objections, how they absorb new data.
Yeah, and also I'd say the last one is how they how crisply they communicate and get through the noise to a signal. And that's the most important part as you're running an efficient, scalable organization.
Where did you learn this was a more effective path than just traditional interviews? Did you get burnt or something?
It got burned a little, but I think it was it's mostly through mentors. I've had the benefit of a number of mentors over my career, and the CEO at Granular, who I joined before we were Granular back in 2013, has been one of the strongest. And so picking up some of those best practices and then just tweaking them as we go. I also think it's from feedback of candidates and the process itself. It tends to create a robust one where if you're getting compliments on your interview process, you're doing something right. And if you never have, then you probably could improve it.
Got it. What would you guess the organization will be a year from now in terms of size, in terms of people?
I think we'll about double. I don't know if it'll be exactly July next year, but certainly by the end of 2021, looking at the pace we're at.
So based on,
we're hiring, we've got job descriptions open if your listeners are interested. That'll continue.
Aside from your website, where do you find the best candidates?
LinkedIn is pretty good, and Indeed, those are the two kind of standards. But it is something where, as at our stage and Granular and Monotate, which was another startup I was at, using good recruiters is really important. And I think there's some cost-efficient ways you can do it to leverage yourself. Because if you're trying to do it all and you're growing fast, you're probably going to be going too slow and leaving value on the table.
Yeah, and it's all about speed at this point, certainly.
It's speed and learning agility. That's the name of the game. That's right.
Well, Adam, I give you a ton of credit. You're 4 months in, you're leading Sound Agriculture, newly funded, doubling over the next year, and you're doing it all from your bedroom, which is amazing. And these 30 people doing it from home. So best of luck. How can people learn more about Sound Agriculture or get in touch?
So probably website's the best way. So it's www.sound-ag.com, and can also just reach out to me at a.litle@sound-ag.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam. We appreciate it.
Yeah, fun conversation. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the invite.